Hello everyone. My name is Elise, so welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We're doing my September wrap up, and it's kind of all over the place. Not in a bad way, but I just mean like in terms of like genres, themes, all those types of things. It's a real mixed bag of the types of books that I was reading this month, which is kind of exciting. It's always nice when I feel like I get a good variety, and that's definitely the case here. So we have, I think, 8 books to talk about today. So like usual, we're going to talk about them in the order that I read them, and I hope you enjoy. So let's go ahead and dive right in, because the first book is definitely a good one, and that is Down with the Poor. This is by Shumona Sinha, and it's translated by Teresa Lavender Fagen and published by Deep Vellum. This was the last book that I read for my Deep Vellum publisher taste test video, and I will link that down below if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts about this book. But I really enjoyed this, and this has stuck with me after I've read it as well, and I've definitely thought about, honestly, like the writing style, which has been interesting for a thing to linger with me. I think more commonly it tends to be like themes or ideas that the book is trying to have you sit with and wrestle with. But this, it's like some of the sentences, just like on a sentence structure level, were really great. So this one is about a woman who is a translator, and she's a translator specifically for people who are trying to seek asylum in Paris. She herself immigrated to Paris from Calcutta a long time ago, and she has sort of become desensitized to people's stories and some of the ways that people feel forced into telling their story in such a way that would better ensure asylum, maybe, let's go with that. And she also gets desensitized to violence because she's hearing a lot of the reasons why people are fleeing, which have to do with violence in a lot of cases. And it's just how that starts to impact her over the years of doing this job. I think that alone is a very interesting premise. It's kind of balancing 2 interesting themes around language and then also around violence. And I loved the intersection of those. I thought this writing, like I was alluding to earlier, some of the sentences were just pure gold. So quotable. If you were a person who wrote down or journaled quotes, this would be an amazing book for that. And the other side of that, though, which I talked about in that publisher taste test video, is that some of the other sentences, I wasn't sure why they were there. So it was this mixed bag of, okay, this sentence was absolutely spectacular. I can't believe you distilled a thought that complex into one sentence. And then other sentence, I was like, this feels extraneous. I'm not sure why it's here. So I didn't think it was perfect, but I did really enjoy this novel and would highly recommend. I do think this is sort of like the love child of Intimacies by Katie Katamura, and we had to remove this post by Hannah Bervutz. So that is Down with the Poor. Very much enjoyed. Next up, we have a library book. So I will put the picture over here. And I read the Ballad of, what is it called? The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? Yes, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is by Suzanne Collins, and it's published by Scholastic, I think. I'm pretty sure it's published by Scholastic. I'll correct it if that's wrong. And this, as you may know, is the prequel to the Hunger Games series. And I have been well and truly obsessed with watching the Hunger Games this year. So in a vlog, I think this was in a vlog. So I went home in March to see my parents, and my mom loves the Hunger Games. And while I was visiting back home, we decided to rewatch the whole series, and we did. And I was so shocked as to how well they held up. They were still super interesting, and the themes also held up better than I would have expected. So that kind of set the journey. And then over the summer, I had a friend tell me that he read the book and really enjoyed it and thought that I should read the book, because I knew I wanted to see the movie. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read the book before the movie comes out. And I finally did it. And overall, I enjoyed the book. I don't know if it matches up to the original trilogy. Again, it's been so long since I read that original trilogy that I couldn't tell you for certain, but I do think that this had a couple problems in it. One, this book is very long, which is another reason why I read it, because it counts as one of my picante beef babies, which I'm so excited about, but more on that in my reading goals check-in video. But this one, the exposition in the beginning was way too much. Way too much. It did not all need to be there. It was like almost halfway before you really got to any true action in the plot. And part of what you're reading these for is action, right? It's Hunger Games. Like, you want to see the Hunger Games. And then conversely, the ending, I think, wrapped up much too quickly. So those are my two biggest gripes with it. I also think that by nature, this book is probably just going to be less enjoyable because you're following Snow as the main character. I guess I should tell you what it's about, but you're following Snow's character. So you're getting his backstory and you learn more about the initial rebellion that took place, and you're following them during the 10th Hunger Games, I believe. And it's the first Hunger Games in which they're trying to make it more of a spectacle, like they talk about in the original trilogy, and how Snow is involved in that process. It's also the first Hunger Games where they add mentors. But this Hunger Games, the mentors are people from the capital, and Snow ends up being a mentor to a competitor from District 12. And that's how the story unfolds. So that's the synopsis. Because you're following Snow's perspective and you already know where he ends up, you know that it's going to be a less likable journey than, say, following Katniss, right? That's a character you want to root for. And Snow is much more complicated and devious than that. So you don't get to root for him as much, which was also just like, it's slightly less enjoyable, at least for me, with like a book that I'm wanting a lot of entertainment value from. It's less fulfilling, maybe, to have to follow a character that isn't as likable. But overall, again, I still really enjoyed it. It was fascinating to see the setup of Snow and kind of how he becomes who he is, who the other players in the game are, because Snow comes to power in, I think, a really unique way. And he has a lot of influences in his life where he could kind of go one way or another and maybe is led into a path. So yeah, really, really intriguing. I think if you like the original series, if you want to see the movie, highly encourage you to read the book. I think it was very fun. And there are very cool Easter eggs in the book, I will say, particularly around music that you hear in the initial trilogy. That music gets its origins in this book, and I thought that was fascinating. So that is The Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds. Probably just talked about that way too long, but it is what it is. I had a lot of thoughts. So next up, we have A Cowardly Woman No More. This is by Ellen Cooney, and it's published by Coffeehouse Press. This was one of my 5-star predictions, and unfortunately it wasn't a 5-star. I did still enjoy it, but it wasn't what I imagined to be. So what I thought this was is an adventure novel that takes place in space, okay? And I will say, I feel misled by the blurb, because the blurb specifically says, her company's annual banquet day sets in motion a surprising adventure revealing unexpected allies, hidden passageways, and an interstellar secret, right? Okay, so I took that as like, okay, she's gonna go into space, gonna have to do with space somehow. That's not really what it is. So what this book, I would describe it as, is it takes place in 24 hours. There are flashbacks though. And it is about a woman, what's her name? Trisha, who's been working at a corporate job for many years, is up for a promotion that she is extremely qualified for, and has basically been promised to her without explicitly being done so. And then she ends up not getting that promotion, and an underqualified man gets the promotion instead of her. So that is the initial setup. And then this banquet day is the day that we're actually following, and it's a yearly event that her work does to celebrate all of the employees. They announce an Employee of the Year award, those types of things. You get the setup. So this follows a lot of themes around sexism in the workplace and corporate America. It does a really good job of exploring those themes, I believe, but the adventure part that I feel like I was promised is just not there for me. It is very slow, contemplative, And I don't mind that, but I don't feel like that's what I was initially sold. So I wasn't going in expecting that. I do think the interstellar part has to do with a comet. That's not a spoiler for me to say. The comet comes up quite frequently in discussion in this book, but that is like, that felt like small peas to me, if you know what I mean. Didn't really have a ton of thematic integration into the book, other than having this more like whimsical element to it. So yeah, much more thinky, much slower. And while I loved a lot of the exploration of the themes, it is pretty heavy-handed, so know that going in. And some of it just all didn't tie up together for me. I felt like, okay, like some of this is just like not new, and it's not being said in a new way either. So like, I get it. Yeah, and felt kind of just like good about it. So good, not great for me, but if that sounds interesting to you, I still think it's a well-written book. So that is A Cowardly Woman No More. Next up, we have another book that there is a video for, and that is the next in the Sherlock Holmes series. This is the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle, and this is the headline edition. This is the 4th in publication order, and I really, really enjoyed this one. Again, I'll link the vlog down below if you want more in-depth thoughts, but I think this might be my favorite so far. The stories in here were really engaging. You get some characters that you haven't had before, like you get Mycroft, which is Sherlock's brother, you get Moriarty, so those are just really interesting characters to be thrown into the mix, and I enjoyed it for that reason. So that is the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Next up, we have the summer book. This is by Tove Janson, and this one is translated. Let me get the translator. This is translated by Thomas Teal from the Swedish, and it's published by New York Review of Books. And this is another one where like I liked, I didn't love. So Tove Janson is maybe most commonly known for the, is it called Moomin? I think it's pronounced Moomin. Someone tell me if that's wrong. But they're like an illustrated character series that she is most famous for. But this is a novel all about a grandmother and her granddaughter, and they're staying on an island for the summer, and it's just about their interactions with one another. It's extremely slice of life, and I do typically enjoy that. And my favorite thing about this was the nature writing. So getting to experience the island, the isolation of it, but also the beauty of it, and the connection to the land that they had was definitely my favorite part. This also has very cool illustrations in it, so I'd highly recommend grabbing a physical copy if you want to see some of the illustrations. So I loved that aspect of it. The part that I wasn't as much sold on was the relationship between the grandma and the granddaughter. Again, it's very slice of life, so I think that's what it's meant to be. But for me, I'm down with slice of life, but I want the characters then to be able to carry it. And I didn't feel like the characters could totally carry the absence of plot that was happening here. I either want them to be interesting and like nuanced as characters and or likable. It doesn't have to be both. One or the other is fine, even, and more likely interesting. But I just felt like that wasn't really the case here. They were very standard grandma and granddaughter. And again, that can be really enjoyable to read, but it just didn't wow me in any way. But I will say, I definitely want to pick up Tove Janson again. I think Audrey from Audrey Approved recommended another one to me that they had recently read. So I do have plans to have that be the next one I pick up by them once I am able to find it. But yeah, interested in reading from them again. But I will say this does center around grief in a removed way. So if you're wanting to read about grief in a way that isn't like totally visceral and in your face, this might be really healing for you, because really this centers around the absence of what they're talking about, which is that the mother and daughter of these two has passed away, and that's not really mentioned in this book. So it's sort of like the absence of her is something that we're grappling with in this book as well. But yeah, That is the summer book. Next up, we have The Swimmers by Julie Otsuka, and this is published by Conan. This was the book that I needed to read for my book haul revisit, the one I picked to put on my TBR. I had been told that this was extremely sad, and it was in many ways. I actually didn't cry, and I surprised myself that I didn't cry. I do think this is very good. This is sort of a novel in two parts. The first part is told in a collective we voice, and it's about all these people who are regular swimmers at a community pool that they are paid members of. So it's just about like their days, what the pool means to them, how the pool allows them to identify as something other than like non-pool people. And that section was the section that I think tried to do a little bit too much. So it is really pulling in a lot of threads of like politics, conspiracy theories, like all these things that would float into our heads in everyday life. But I think it's doing too much of that. If it would have tried to pull some out from certain themes instead of just kind of like everything, I would have personally enjoyed it better. I understand that maybe isn't what the author wanted for it, and that's totally fine. But for my personal enjoyment, I would have liked it better if it had a little bit more of a thematic structure to it. But yeah, it is what it is. You can't win them all. So the second half of the book is about one of the swimmers in particular. Her name is Alice, and she is in the beginning in early onset dementia, then like fully in dementia, and you kind of see her deteriorating over time. And she gets placed in a care home, and it's about her living there, but really also about her interaction with her family members, particularly one of her daughters and her husband. So you get to see them like visiting her, kind of again seeing the deterioration, trying to make sense and meaning of their life together when one person doesn't have full recollection of your life together. And that half of the book was spectacular. I loved that half of the book, and it was very moving. It was so relatable and raw, and I know that word gets used a lot, but it was so visceral of an experience of what it's like to know someone with dementia and how complex that is. And I just thought she did an amazing job of doing this. I do think that this is sort of autofiction in a way, especially that section, because there are multiple things about the author that are mirrored in one of the daughters. Not that that needs to mean anything, but it's just something that you start to notice as you're reading it. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this. I get why so many people loved it. And yeah, I think a lot of people should read it. So that is The Swimmers. Two more. We're getting close to the end. All right, the next book that I read was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is published by Flatiron Books, and this is the first Jane Harper that I have read, even though I own 3 more of her books. This one follows a premise about 3 brothers who live deep in the Australian outback, and they are kind of ranchers, and one of the brothers is found dead, and the other 2 are kind of at his body in the opening scene, waiting for the police to arrive, and you get going from an investigation from there. You're in the perspective of one of the brothers, Nathan. Is he the oldest brother? I don't think he is, but you're following from Nathan's perspective, and immediately he starts to see inconsistencies maybe in the crime scene. A lot of people think that it is suicide, and he's starting to find reasons to believe that it wouldn't be suicide. This book also has a ton of unveiling of family secrets, and this family has secrets. Like, whew, let me tell you, there's a lot of secrets. And the atmosphere was really, really oppressive and hot. Like, that constantly gets talked about, and I enjoyed that. It really does seem like the desert is a character in this. As far as the mystery goes, this is definitely a slow burn, which I, again, am okay with. But this one I think was a little bit too long. I don't think it gave quite enough to hold the number of pages that it is. It's like 330 or something like that. But I do think overall it was still good. It was still enjoyable. I did not see who did it coming. I think this is a really fun mystery. I would definitely classify this as a mystery and not a thriller. So that is The Lost Man by Jane Harper. And lastly, we have a poetry collection, and that is The Heiress / Ghost Acres by Lightsey Darst, and this is published by Coffee House Press. Now, this is also split in two halves. That's been coming up a lot for me lately. Now, the first half, The Heiress, is set up in what you would probably describe as like a typical placement on the page for a poem. And then the second half, Ghost Acres, is separated by these images. So this is the author here, and this is one of their ancestors. And then the last half is all written horizontally. So that's how it's separated. This poetry collection, this has a lot going on, as most poetry collections do. So this poetry collection is really grappling with identity and what it means to look at your ancestral heritage and how that has impacted yours and your communities and the world's lives as well, for better or worse. So she is a white woman. She's trying to understand how, as a white woman coming from a long line of white women, that has impacted where she lives and her community, and again, the world. I do think that premise is very interesting, and the poems that are about her ancestors specifically were my favorite by far. There's also a lot of talk about her children because she is now an ancestor of her children. So there's a lot about motherhood. Some were hit and miss in here, but that's to be expected for a poetry collection, I think. And I do appreciate the kind of project that she's trying to do here. There's a section at the end of notes, and she talks about a lot of the poems in a little bit more detail, and I thought that was very fascinating and would highly recommend reading that if you pick this up. But yeah, that is The AYS Ghost Acres. So those are the 8 books that I read in the month of September. Please let me know what you read in the month of September, and if you are interested in any of these, tell me about it in the comments down below, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.